Welcome to the Encouragement Engineering Podcast, where we combat the negativity that inundates our daily lives with a positive perspective and positive action. Today's guest is Dr. Rick Chromey. Dr. Rick Chromey is a cultural explorer, leadership imagineer, and inspirational edu-trainer. Yes, I said that right. He's also an expert in generational theory and an influential thought leader who travels the U.S. and the world to speak on leadership, culture, history, and education. Rick has authored over a dozen books, including his recent bestseller, GenTech, An American Story of Technology, Change, and Who We Really Are. And in 2017, Rick founded MANNA, Educational Services International, a faith-based nonprofit organization to empower leaders, teachers, pastors, and parents. That's a lot of P's. So please welcome to the show, Rick Chromey. Dr. Rick, welcome, and thank you for being here today. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you for that introduction. You read it just like I wrote it there, Bob.
There you go. Well, Rick, let's get into more of that if we can. If we can, tell our audience how you got to where you are, because you have a plethora of items, and that's only the short version of your bio. So fill us in on how you got to where you are today.
A plethora. We're going to have to run P's through our conversation today. Well, how did I get to where I was at? Well, it's interesting because a lot of times I'm a professional writer, speaker. I get to travel all over the world, and people pay the dime, and it's a wonderful life, and I'm living the dream, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm a starving artist over here in Boise, Idaho. But people ask me, "How'd you get to where you're at? How'd you do it?" And I say, I just took one step at a time. I just keep doing the next right thing. And in fact, the next right thing for me is to be on your podcast, Bob.
There you go.
Don't
look too far ahead,
It's a slow process. I mean, I started out, when you think about my writing career, I've been writing all my life. My first book I wrote was a little thing I illustrated for my grandma back in the day, and I was only 6 years old. And I just took steps along the way. I constantly kept writing. I kept, in the area of speaking, I just kept doing it. You have to work a long time at it, and you have to build audiences one person at a time. There's no secrets. You can go out. I know today you can go out and buy yourself, followers and do all that. But the ones who are really making a difference, I think, and I really like Seth Godin's approach to things. He says you build your audience one at a time, and it may take you a long time to actually spark and find that movement, but it's a slow process, but good.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I fully answered that, but I've also, like you said, got a long resume. So,
yeah,
you can pick it apart as you want.
And it's interesting because part of your bio talks about empowering leaders, and you study how and why our culture moves. And I think that's interesting because in inspiration or motivation, if you will, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to get people to move, to take action. How do you, help people? Not only, everybody becomes a leader, no matter if they're leading themselves or others. If you can't lead yourself, you're in big trouble, but that's where it starts. So as you lead people, how do you get them to, and the other part is that you help people to motivate productively without gimmicks. I love that. How do you do that?
And guilt. Yeah, no guilt, gimmicks, or games. That's right. Now we're going to move to G words.
Yeah.
But and that little piece, it's interesting. And I'll just give a word of advice to your audience here. You got to reinvent yourself about every 5 years. If you stay in that same place longer than 5 years, you're going to become obsolete to your own audience,
right.
Not just build new ones. So you've got to constantly be changing and moving. For me, that's why when you look at my my organization today, I have things that work for parents, I have things that work for pastors, I have things that work for leaders and teachers, because I've been all of those.
Right.
I've been all of those, and so I can speak into those different communities and different cohorts of people. But one of those chapters in my life many years ago, I was teaching developmental psychology at a university, and I was trying to figure out, and I was also working on how to motivate my students, because quite frankly, grades are poor motivators. In fact, they can actually demotivate, except for those who get A's And for them, they're constantly working for the A. And quite frankly, you give them something any less than an A, and they're nuts too. They go crazy on that, and that's a whole different topic. But as I was trying to figure out how do you naturally motivate a person, I ran into, obviously, Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs kind of, influenced that. But I ran into William Glasser and his control theory. Okay. And he spoke a lot to the 5 basic needs every person has. And I loved it. And I thought, oh, this is really good. The only problem is I started to teach it, I had to test and try to help them understand, were they getting it? And I thought there has to be a way to make this mind easy. And I just made up a word there, mind easy, something where it's easy on the mind to remember, and maybe memorable is the best word here. Okay. And that's when I came across this idea. I call it the growls. The growls were born because I was hungry. I was literally in a museum in St. Louis. It was a science museum. And I was looking at this particular display, and they were talking about the borborygmes. And I went, the borborygmes, that's what I have. It's basically the technical word for stomach growls. Okay. Your stomach growls when it's hungry. And I thought, ooh, that's an interesting thought, because that's what goes on. Every person growls. They growl from within. And so many times what we want to do is we want to massage the message. We want to guilt people. We want to gimmick people. We want to dress up the message in some way, or to make them more productive, or to perform better. When the reality is, it's if we create environments that naturally attract, naturally scratch the itch, or better yet, the niche of what people need, they're naturally attracted. So as I started to think about that, I created this acronym that uses borrowed from Maslow, borrowed from Glasser, but really kind of created even my own thoughts on the matter. And I created the growls and the 6 basic needs that motivate every person. And we can then talk about these more if you want. But first of all, grace. It's an acronym, growls. G for growls in growls is grace. We have we're drawn to unconditional spaces. Right. We want those places where, and I love the word grace. It's such a spiritual word, and it's a hard thing to wrap your mind around, but grace is an environment, a space where we feel free. We feel liberated. We feel, hey, I'm okay. This is a good place for me. It's a place of surprise, a place of blessing. And it's good. The R, and the rest of these, by the way, grace is the most messy, murky, strange, hard one to wrap our minds around. Let's just be honest. But the rest of these tend to be more practical, more pragmatic, more useful, utilitarian, you might say, as far as how they play out. The R is relationship. I think we're all born with a huge inner need to connect, to collaborate. In leadership, we have to be in collaborative environments. That's really where our creativity sparks, is in collaborative environments. Where no man is an island, right? Right. And then finally, community. We're looking for that community. We're looking for to quote from Cheers, a place where everybody knows our name. Yeah. So that's relationship. Yeah. That's relationship. And then the O is ownership. I call that the second ship that sails. Relationship is the first ship. The second ship is ownership. And ownership is all about control, choice, contribution. It's about releasing a person to empowering a person, really, to use their gifts, their skills, and bring themselves to the table and to make a difference. Right. And isn't that true? All of us want to just leave this life with some sort of a mark. I think that's part of the
more than a headstone.
Yeah, right. We want something on our headstone that matters. Yeah. And then W is worth. And I realize I'm going through these quickly, but time is short. I think deep down, worth, we have an innate deep need to feel valued, to feel, like I matter again. I'm more than just a $1.87 in chemicals, and I'm more than just a person who's going to end up in the dirt someday. There's something about me that matters. I am making a difference in this life. I can make a difference in this life. In fact, I would suggest that the first step towards a suicide is when you no longer believe that you matter. You have to literally erase that from your mind and come to the conclusion that I no longer matter to anyone. I don't even matter to me anymore. That's the recipe for a suicide. So to value someone, to give them a voice, and really deeper, to give them a vision for who they are based upon what they can do is such a gift. And that's what leaders do. That's what teachers do. That's what parents should be doing, is giving these as gifts to their children that they value, they matter. Now, if you think about it, GROW, what's that spell?
Grow.
Right, grow. If you want to grow your team, if you want to grow your employee staff, if you want to grow your volunteer staff, if you want to grow your classroom, or if you're a parent in the home, if you want to grow your home emotionally, psychologically, mentally, spiritually, whatever you're thinking about there, if you want to grow it, you focus on these 4 environments. Is this a place of grace? Is this a place of relationship? Is this a place of ownership, empowerment? Is this a place of value, worth, affirmation?
Right.
The last 2 and by the way, I call those the power needs. Those are the power needs that we all have. The last 2 needs I call the primitive needs. These are the deepest needs of all. They're very deep. They're significant to who we are as human beings. First of all, and many people are surprised by this, laughter. The L in growls is laughter. I say you can't even spell fundamental without the word fun to start it off.
Yeah.
We are built for pleasure, which is why we're constantly seeking pleasure. We constantly want to be happy. We constantly want to feel enjoyment, be entertained. Right. That is a deep human need. And then the last one is just security. Deep down, we want to feel secure.
Right.
Physically, we want to feel secure, but also emotionally, we want to feel secure. So whether you're a parent or a teacher or a pastor or a business leader, whatever you do, you want to create environments that meet all 6 of these needs. You want to make them secure. You want to make them fun.
Right.
In fact, that's the first thing I look at when I walk into a classroom. I observe classrooms all the time, even businesses. I'll tell you what.
Businesses are the worst ones. I mean, you can walk in and it's gray. Everything's gray. I mean,
it is. Have you ever been to that up in Seattle? There's a place down on the wharf. It's there was a book several years ago called Fish.
Yeah. And I think the fish market.
Yeah, the fish market down there. I mean, that's a place when you walk into it, everybody's having fun.
Yeah.
Or there are certain businesses where you walk in, you go, yeah, they're having fun here. And it doesn't take much. By the way, that's one of the stickiest things you can do. People talk about being sticky today. How do you be attractive and retentive in your approach? It's about having fun.
Right.
Make it secure, but then make it fun. And people will be drawn to that. I think people are probably drawn to this conversation right now simply because, hey, we're having fun at it.
And that's a great point, because so many times, business, religion, doesn't matter, those topics, people say, well, it's got to be serious. We're people first. We are people first. And like you said, laughter, that's a key piece to bring people together. You want to get people to, have fun, laugh at, if nothing else, at yourself, and then show them it's okay. And they start to loosen up. They have fun. That's so critical, because then it is a secure environment. They see you doing it, and they're willing to do, and open up a little bit and have that fun, so they can see the opportunity, see the learning, see what other people do, and realize they're not the only ones that have a situation. They be thinking, I'm the only one that does this. It's not, as I tell people a lot of times, it doesn't matter the color of your skin. We all bleed red. We all want, security for our families. We all want to enjoy life. We all want to, grow with our families and things. We want similar things. It's just we speak different languages. Our skin color may be a little bit different. Melatonin might be more in one person than the other. It doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. Great points. Really interesting.
Back to that grace for a moment. Yeah. I think that's where grace covers the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of that divine layer, if you will. It's and maybe it's because it's a great spiritual word, but it does kind of cover everything and allows you to be who you are. Because if you've got a great community around you, if you got family and friends that are supporting you, who cares what anybody else says about you out there?
Right.
If you've got just a few people in your life that says, you know what, I like you, and I think what you're saying matters. And, because so many of us today live for the like.
Yeah.
I have to admit, that's part of my story. I was abandoned as a child, Bob. My mom literally walked out on the family when I was 12 years of age. Very tender age to have that happen to. I was abandoned. And I spent most of my young adulthood years trying to get the applause.
Right.
You know, trying to get people to like me. And it's very tempting, even today in this social media culture, to want to live by the like. You know, I've written some brilliant things in my mind, and I know they're good things. You know, I know when I get done writing, I go, this is great. I'll post it to Facebook, and I kid you not, if nobody likes it within 30 minutes, I am so tempted to pull it off, because I'm thinking, oh, maybe it's not as good as I think, or maybe people are basically voting and saying, no, this isn't good. It's a terrible way. It's a trap.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I can see where that definitely is. And it's, if you know it is good and God's given you the thought, hey, he's got a little more power than any social media platform. So, you know, I'll go with what I think he's been able to give us. So
on the other hand, just to be fair, there have been times when I've written something and I let it sit for 30 minutes. I looked at it and went, yeah, I don't want this out there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. That realization, like, maybe not, you know.
No, thankfully nobody liked it or shared it.
Well, and that brings out another point, your communication skills. You being a pastor before, you know, writing, those communication skills are critical. And even posting on social media, we've got to be careful how we say certain things, what we say. What are some key things that you help people to do that, even in motivation? I mean, your communication is critical, because it can go south very quickly by one word. Have you perfected that over your trainings? How have you, what have you done with that? Are you constantly learning with that?
Well, this is an excellent question, and I'm just going to give a resource right from the top. It saved my life. In fact, even now as I'm talking with you, I'm using the skills I picked up in Toastmasters.
There you go. Yeah.
Toastmasters is one of the best organizations you can join to understand not just your own, I call it verbal graffiti. Yeah. We all have verbal graffiti in our life.
I like that.
Yeah. If you're familiar with Toastmasters, when you give a speech, they count your ahs, your ums, your double clutches, all those things that mess up and make speech so difficult. You learn to slow down. When I first did a table topic, and if you're familiar with, I think you're familiar with Toastmasters.
Yeah, I was part of Toastmasters.
Yeah, the first time I did a table topic, which is impromptu, they give you a little bit of something to talk about, and then you stand up and you got 2 minutes to talk. I had 30 seconds of an answer, and I think I had 30 ahs and ums and double clutches and everything else. They stopped counting on me. I was so bad. That's when I realized I needed this organization. And I just committed myself to keep improving and doing a little bit better. But in answer to your question, it was in Toastmasters, I also learned how to evaluate. A big piece of how we communicate is the ability to evaluate and give constructive criticism. We live in a culture that loves to criticize, but often it's not constructive criticism.
Right.
And Toastmasters has this unique evaluation strategy, and I love it. Maybe you learned the same thing that I did, and that is the sandwich approach.
Yeah.
When you evaluate somebody, you start off with something good. So this is good. You really excelled at this. It caught my attention. I love what you're doing here. And then what you do is let me give you some suggestions for improvement. That's that middle meat part of the sandwich. And then you close with, again, some good.
Right.
So it's not all bad. If you just stood up there and this is what happens. A lot of leaders do this, teachers in particular. When we evaluate papers, we often got the red marks all over it. We're picking out the bad stuff. I do the same thing on papers. I try to have more good than I have bad noted. Well, boy, I really like that sentence. You really spoke in a way there. That voice that you used in that particular story, I love that. We can do that in papers as we grade, evaluate. We can do it in our conversations. I've used that skill even in my own relationship with my wife. As we've had a struggle or a moment in our marriage, I've shared with her, you know what, honey, you're doing this good. And thank you. But, just a little suggestion for improvement here, but ending on the good again.
Yeah. that's also part of critical conversations. They talk about that same concept.
Right.
Yeah, it's important to do that because we need that reaffirmation, that affirmation that of the good we've done. And like you said, that meat part is where the growth is, and that's where you put that in the middle of the sandwich. That's the best part of it, and that's where we're going to grow. We need to understand that. And I remember doing a speech at Toastmasters, and it was a topic that, for some reason, I was hung up on the content I wanted to give, and so they could tell me, but there were certain points when I talk about my kids, I'd light up. And that was the feedback I got, was when you talk about your kids, it's like there's nothing stopping you. But when you go back to these facts that you needed us to understand, it was like you were reading it. And I always remember that because we've got to be natural. We got to speak from the heart. And I think that's where that introductory speech they ask you to give, that's coming from here. That's about you. It doesn't have to be written. You're who you are. You can tell people that. You can show them your energy, your invigoration, tell them about you because you know who you are. And that's so critical that, you talk about that idea. And it goes back to your growl concept as well, because that's where we want to fit in. We want to have that grace of we're humans too, and we can be that way. Great. Okay.
Toastmasters, by the way, depending on the group you got involved with, didn't have a lot of grace. I found a few of my groups that I went to had no grace at all. I'm going, this isn't for me. So I actually started teaching at the higher level within Toastmasters, helping these different clubs understand. In fact, one of the first things I always told Toastmasters, in our area anyway, that's where I was at, higher leadership, is let's get rid of the club word. I know that's what we're supposed to call ourselves as a club, but if you call ourselves a leadership community, you're going to get more people attracted to a leadership community than a speaking club.
Right.
Changing the vocabulary. And this is something that leaders need to recognize. How you present yourself. Churches need to recognize this. How you present yourself is what's going to draw. And sometimes changing the vocabulary.
And it's funny you mentioned that, a club. You think about that. The first thing I think of is what? The club beating you over the head,
Oh, yeah, okay.
I don't want to be hit over the head. Yeah. Well, the dues and the money. Yeah. But yeah, that simple change in a word does make such a big difference. And it shows your openness. Leadership means growth to me. Okay. This is a growth organization. This is where you're going to learn to grow, and in growing in communication is critical. I find it interesting that you mentioned your organization, MANNA. And it's more curiosity for me. Did that come from the Bible verse, our daily bread and the manna stories? I mean, is that where you came from? That?
Yes.
Okay.
It actually is a biblical word,
yeah.
But it fits. Let me give you the Hebrew behind that word. The Hebrew meaning of the word manna is, what is it? It's literally a question mark. It's what is it? So the biblical story is kind of fascinating. God is going to provide these Israelites out in the middle of the desert some quail. He gave them some quail, and he also gave them manna. I guess they needed to have a little bit of bread with their meat, the first sandwich or something. But he's going to give them manna, and every morning he's going to give this manna. And we don't have no idea even what it looked like or anything. Most scholars think it was something like a Rice Krispie or a rice puff of some sort. But anyway, this manna was very nutritious. It was bread. It was free bread. They didn't have to pay for it. It just kind of showed up in the morning, and it would disappear with the dew. I mean, they had to gather it fairly early, and it would last them all day. If they even held on to it for an extra day, it would spoil. It was amazing. But the word itself is, what is it in Hebrew? So when they looked out that first morning at this white stuff all over the ground, they went, manna. And then I think the second day they went, manna. And that's, if you look at my organization name, we have MANNA all in all caps with an exclamation point. It's MANNA because we are we want to create curiosity. I want to train in a way where you want more. When this podcast ends, you're going to want, oh man, I want more of that. I want the same thing to happen in my training, and I'm always going around, looking for opportunities to train and to share. And it's the same thing, creating curiosity and creating grace, building community, empowering people, inspiring them to recognize who they are. The growls live in everything I do. And MANNA is the exemplification of that, of the growls.
And with your your knowledge and your experience, you know, as a pastoral leader and all that, and, you know, did that give you patience and insight to be able to, I mean, that's, let's face it, as a pastoral leader, there's times where you got to have a lot of patience.
Oh yeah.
Did that help you to grow in your skills and your other skills in doing this as well? Because like you said, you're teaching parents, you're teaching pastors, you're teaching students, and you've done all this. You've been part of these, so you have that experience. Did that, you know, was that all a part of your growth?
Oh, wow. See, now you're getting personal, Bob. You know,
Well, we're people.
I am probably one of the most impatient people on the planet. And part of that is because I'm a type A plus, you know. Okay. I want to go out there. I'm a visionary leader.
Yeah.
I've always been that type of person that can see the steps. Mm-hmm. You know, you want to get to there, I know how to get you there. Part of the problem is that we're gonna have to burn down the camp to get us there. You're willing to do that, you know, right. And a lot of people aren't. My problem with visionary leadership is that, for me anyway, the organizations that I was a part of didn't really, they couldn't catch the vision. And so what I've learned, and my doctorate, by the way, was in leadership and the emerging culture, but the leadership portion of it, I studied hard and really learned a lot about how to reimagine how I was leading. And the growls were already part of that structure, but when it came to my own leadership, I needed to, as you said, I needed to dial it down, kind of walk with my people.
Yeah.
I think it's John Maxwell who says that if you're leading and nobody's following, you're just taking a walk.
Yeah. Yeah. And he was a pastor himself.
And he understood that. I think one of the blessings about being a pastor and having that pastoral background is that when you work with church people, there isn't a lot of times that grace that's there. So you have to build that into the DNA. And it's interesting because in the Christian culture, grace is a huge part of the vocabulary. And yet churches a lot of times are the least in exemplifying this grace. So for me, you know, I have to be the picture of that. I have to be, you know, I hope to be more my vocabulary correct here. I hope to basically be like Jesus.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of what, when I lead, I want to lead in a way that you go, you know what? There's something about that guy I like. I don't have to agree with everything he has to say. I don't necessarily have to want what he's preaching, but I like the guy. I think that's the way Jesus was. Yeah. You know, he was very much, he offended a lot of people, but he was a likable guy.
But he also knew what they were thinking. Yeah.
Right. And in our deeply divisive political culture we have today, I think we need to have more likability.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. I was at a store the other day picking something up, and of course, in that rush of the Memorial Day weekend and all that, and one lady just said, "People just need to be nice." Yeah. It's like, wow, you're right. Let's just be nice. We're all, you know, we all have 24 hours a day. We'll be nice. We'll get our stuff. We don't have to be, you know, impatient. It is not always easy to do by any means. I will not deny that I can be impatient at times, but yeah, it's like you said, to be like Jesus, that's a tall order, because there's so much that will rub us as humans that are just, all of a sudden we're out on left field, going on a tangent on something that we really didn't need to, you know, go there with. And it can be hard. And that's where I think prayer, faith, perseverance takes it over, that, you know, we can focus on that opportunity to grow. How can I get better? How can I make this situation something I've learned from, and be humble that you've learned from it.
Preach it, Bob. Preach it.
All right.
You keep preaching, you're gonna have to pass a plate here and I'll have to contribute.
Yeah. As long as it's got something on it, you know, let's go for it. We'll pass the plate.
But here's something interesting, because and again, not everybody here in this conversation is going to agree with this, but a lot of the gimmicks, let's just talk, you know, I talk about motivating naturally. A lot of that comes out of my own life philosophy, that we are created in the image of God.
Right.
you know. And so let me just give you a thought here, and this is kind of a biblical thought, but if you'll hang with me for a moment, I think it'll make some sense. You know, a lot of the incentives, a lot of the reward traps that we get into today come out of a form of psychology called behavioral psychology. It is a psychology that emerged in the early 1900s around guys like B.F. Skinner, John Watson, Ivan Pavlov, those individuals. But B.F. Skinner in particular, Skinnerian behavioral psychology was significant. B.F. Skinner was agnostic, actually was an atheist. He didn't believe in God at all. In fact, he really wanted to eradicate, in his case, he wanted to eradicate Christianity from the planet. He had no use for it whatsoever, which is fine. That was his thing. But what was interesting was he was working off of a brand new idea scientifically that we are evolved, that human beings are nothing more than evolved animals. And that's where behavioral psychology operates. It works from the fact that you can trick or train a human being just like you would trick or train a dog or trick or train a rat to go through a maze, whatever it might be. And that's a fundamental difference that I would have. And as far as how I approach life, how I motivate people, is when I look at a person, I don't look at them as another dog to train. In fact, I look at them, I think we get it backwards. We're not creating the image of dog, we're creating the image of God, right? And when we get it backwards, we tend to create bad philosophy. And obviously, when we get into this area, people will say, I use rewards, I use incentives, and they work. And I go, yeah, they do. I won't deny they work, but they're temporary. They often create cheating. They often create shortcuts. And in the end, when you take away the reward, the research is deep on this, by the way. Daniel Pink had a whole book on this called Drive, where he put this out there. Alfie Kohn had a book several years ago called Punished by Rewards. I think it was mid-90s, where the research in education, in the business world, in marketing, even in parenting, what we're finding is that the reward, if it's offered, will motivate temporarily, and you may actually see some small results in those people who do it well. But the majority of people, it demotivates. And in the end, when you remove the reward from it, even the people that were chasing the reward, they now are less motivated to do what you were originally using the reward to get them to do. So why use rewards? And that was the big philosophical thing for me back in the mid-90s. And that's when I started thinking, how do we motivate a person naturally? And that's how the Growls were born. You know, it's about grace. It's about relationship. It's about empowering ownership and worth and laughter and security.
Great segue there. That's something. And those are good concepts to always remember, because when something's fun and you got a great leader that makes that environment that much better, the rest of the stuff just kind of falls by the wayside. You know, you just go in there because it's your friend, it's, you know, people you care about. It's a great environment. Like you said, you feel needed, and it's a great environment. So that's good to have that growth for people. Well, Rick, where can people find out more about, you know, your website, what you do, and some social media sites for them to contact?
Well, first of all, I'd love to have you take a look at my book out there, my brand new book on generations in technology. We didn't talk too much about that, and that's understandable in this particular conversation, but it's getting great reviews. And if you have an interest in generational analysis and technology, and how we're not boomers or Xers or Gen Z or whatever, we're actually more the space generation or the television generation. If you like that and you want to read something fun, this book will be right up your ticket. You can reach me. My rickchromey.com is probably the best place for those who are interested in my speaking and training. rickchromey.com. If you're interested in more my religious side, faith-based side, mannasolutions.org. MANNA Solutions, MANNA solutions.org. And I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn. Look me up. Let's become friends and let's have some fun together.
Well, Rick, that's great information. I'm going to put that in the show notes. And as you can tell, you know, our audience listening and reviewing this, Rick's a fun guy, and he's got a plethora of more information. Like you said, that book, I'm a history buff myself, so that's intriguing to me. I got to pick that up. And, you know, see how that all works out and have you on for a different type of conversation on another show. So, but that would be great. So we'll put all that in the conversation, Rick. I wanted to thank you for taking the time today to be on the Encouragement Engineering podcast, and appreciate your insight, your input, and your fun demeanor.
It's been a pleasure, Bob.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, Rick.
And an honor.
Thank you. All right. You have a great one.